Hello, Elise Buckeye here, District Planner for the Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District. Welcome to my orientation for new grantees. Let's jump right into learning how to make your grant a success. Before we jump into all the things you'll need to do as a grantee to make sure that your project is a success, let's just set some vision for where this is going. We're really excited to see the impact that your project is going to have. So the first thing that we want you to do is to measure your achievements. It's important to us to have a reduction of waste sent to the landfill, diversion of waste, and we know that your project is going to work on those goals as well. So we want to measure those achievements. Next, we want to give you money. We want you to get reimbursement for those expenses that were approved in your award. We believe that the money getting to those people doing the work in the community is the best way to work to reduce waste. And finally, we want you to reach your goals. Everything that we're going to be going over today is simply dotting those I's, crossing those T's, and making sure that we can reimburse you and support you as you are going through your project. So, based on our experience with grantees over the 35 years that the district has been around, there are a few common issues that can come up, which can sometimes cause issues for grantees and create hiccups for them in completing a project successfully. The most common issue that can cause trouble, you'll see there with a little ghost. Sometimes only one person in your organization knows what's going on, and then they leave. That could be for any number of reasons, whether it's retirement or something unforeseen going on. But the biggest thing that could derail your project is if only one person knows what's going on. They're the person who knew, my email. They're the person who knew where the forms were. They're the person who bought some of the equipment, and now they've left, and somebody is coming and trying to pick up the pieces. So that's something we'll be addressing as we talk through things today. The next issue is indicated here by our money bag, and that's that some grantees are really experienced with different kinds of grants, and they might treat our grant like it is a block grant or another type of gift. So in a block grant, you do have a little bit more freedom in spending some of your funds. And in our grant, we have a contract with each other for what you will be purchasing and what you will be getting reimbursement for. So we'll be talking through that a little bit more as we go. But the other line there, purchases made outside of the FAA. So again, that's the agreement that we sign with each other. And this is something that marks out what you can get reimbursed for and when those purchases can be made. Finally, indicated by our receipt emoji, is the documentation of purchases is incomplete. So perhaps there was a handshake agreement with someone doing some work, or maybe the purchase was made a long time ago, and now you are asking for reimbursement, but you no longer have the proof that that purchase was made. That can cause an issue with getting reimbursement. So we're going to talk through how to make sure that we think ahead, plan ahead to make sure that these issues don't cause problems for our grant. Your responsibilities as a grantee can be pretty clearly divided into these few items here. So track, report, invoice, secure interest, and communicate. You'll note here that report and invoice have little video signs next to them. That's because we have separate training videos about each of those things. So if you want to dig in a little deeper, please go check those out. Let's start at the beginning with track. It is your responsibility to evaluate your progress using a method described in your application. So this was found in your application. There was a section about diversion or other measurable outcomes. So if you are diverting materials, we'll want to see the weight of those materials. You probably indicated in your application that you would be getting scale house receipts, or you would be measuring those. You had a pallet jack with a scale on it. So that's what you're going to need to be doing throughout the project. And you may have said that you were going to take occasional measurements of how heavy something was, and then count how many there were and give us an estimate that way. That's just fine. You just want to follow what you put in your application. Other measurable outcomes may be the number of students engaged, events that you've served, really anything, just what was in that approved application. And then the next part of that is that you're going to report. So you'll report those numbers, the diversion and the other measurable outcomes. You'll also just check in with us every quarter in this report. So it's a quarterly check-in. We have this done through a very simple Google form, and it's due within 30 days of each quarter. So that would be at the end of October, the end of January, the end of April, and the end of July. And again, there's a video on every part of that, so go check it out. Next, invoicing. So you do not get this money as a lump sum. We have to get an invoice form from you for reimbursement. Some of our grantees choose to save all of their expenses up and request reimbursement just at the end of their project, but a lot of our grantees do invoices periodically to get reimbursed for expenses as they come up. So those reimbursements will require proof of the award expenses and also that match that you've committed to. Again, there's a full video going much more in detail on that. One of the things that people tend to forget is that the district does retain a security interest in equipment that is over $5,000 in value. So for vehicles and trailers, you're going to need to list MMSWMD or Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District, that usually doesn't fit, on the title at the time of purchase. So while you are fronting those funds, since they will be reimbursed by the district, we retain that security interest only on the amount that was contributed by the district. For equipment over $5,000, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, and under their business services section, they have a really simple online process for filing for a UCC. That's a Uniform Commercial Code. And that's just going to drop off after 5 years. And we're just required, as this is public funds, to retain that security interest. Finally, communicate. Amendments and extensions are possible. Things come up all the time that might change how your project needs to work. We totally understand that. We just need you to check with us as soon as things look like they're going differently so that we can talk through options. If turnover happens, that little ghost employee happens to leave you high and dry or move on to a new situation, we need you to help us connect with that new manager. So whoever's going to be taking over the project, or maybe someone that was already on the project that could step up and be that point of contact, help us make that connection so that we can give the information to the right person. And then finally, we have a lot of existing resources. So, use those, check and see. We'll go over them in just a minute. But if your questions aren't answered, reach out to us. We could never possibly encompass all of the situations and questions that arise for all of our various grantees. So don't hesitate to reach out if something, doesn't seem to have an easy answer and you need more information. So speaking of those resources that you can look to try and find answers to your questions, here's just a few of those resources. So by far the most important resource you have is that financial assistance agreement that is executed between the district and your organization. We'll be looking at it in just a minute. Part of that, the attachment, Exhibit A, is the general terms and conditions. You have already agreed to this because you did sign the contract, but maybe you haven't read it. So I do really encourage all new grantees to make sure they read through that because it's got the legal information, but it can be really helpful to make sure that you begin your project understanding what your rights and responsibilities are should things come up. Next, you'll see that we have these tutorial videos. You're watching one right now. We have other videos about amendments, invoices, and quarterly reporting, and I'm sure there's more videos to come. And then we have our website, which has a section for grantee resources, and we'll be going over that together as well. So this is an example of our financial assistance agreement. Yours will look different because it will have information filled in. So we're just going to quickly walk through the important parts here. On our second page, we have a work plan. This goes by quarter and it details what you plan to do to accomplish your work. The next page has your budget. This is extremely important. Everything that you request has to be based on this budget. And then finally, it's a nice and short contract. We have the requirements and things that we agree to as parties to this contract. So, for administration requirements, you are agreeing to follow all laws. You are agreeing to follow those terms and conditions. You are committing that any potential changes to the project period, the budget, or the scope of the work will be sent to me and may be subject to various levels of approval. And then the district will preserve all the documentation for at least 3 years. For your work plan and your reporting requirements, you are agreeing to follow that work plan to the extent possible and to accomplish the scope of work during the project period. And you are agreeing to do those quarterly performance reports. And you're agreeing to report at least 4 quarters of tonnage before you, or 4 quarters of outcomes before you submit your final report. On the financial requirements, we've talked about this a little bit. The district will only reimburse for expenses made during the project period and after the FAA is fully executed by both parties. So even though you may have heard, oh, your grant is getting funded, until your authorized signatory and our authorized signatory get together and both sign this, it is not in effect and we cannot reimburse any expenses prior to that. Any program income earned must be reinvested in the project during the project period. Grantee will submit invoices with documentation for approval. It's also important to remember that we do retain 15% of the grant award. So any required liens need to be recorded and the final project needs to be, or the final report needs to be submitted before we can release that 15% retainage. The grantee will file a security interest in any equipment over $5,000 value. And if you are purchasing recycling equipment, it must only be used for collecting recyclables, both during the project period and also while the district retains any security interest. So you cannot buy a recycling truck and use it for trash. That goes over our FAA, and now we'll turn over to the general terms and conditions. So now we're looking at the general terms and conditions. This is Exhibit A of the financial assistance agreement that you signed. We're not going to be going through all of this. There's 17 pages, but as I mentioned earlier, I really, really recommend that you read through this just to make sure that your practices are in alignment with everything that you've agreed to. There are a couple sections I wanted to point out, and that is for equipment management and buildings and site improvements. So if you do have a grant that is purchasing equipment or a grant that is going to be doing site improvements, some kind of building or construction over $5,000 in value, you're definitely going to want to read through those, make sure that you are in compliance with all of the bidding requirements and state laws that are relevant there. And then you will want to go back to this if you have any issues. Maybe you need to cancel your project, or you want to check up on us. We're agreeing to this also. You really do want to make sure that you have this in your files and you're taking a look at it when you need to. So now we're over on the MMSWMD.org website. You can also get there by going to recyclemidmo.com. And after you're on the home page, if you go to grants and sponsorships and then grantee reporting, it will take you here to our grantee resources page. We've tried to separate this so you can easily get to what you need. And I'm just going to quickly go over what all is on the page. So our first section here is our quarterly reporting information. We have a link to that Google form, which we also regularly email out to you, and also the deadlines there. We also have our video posted so that if you ever have trouble or if there's turnover, you can complete that quarterly report as you are required to do. Next up are our amendment request forms. We have a simple one-page document for you to fill out if you need to do an amendment. And we have a budget amendment spreadsheet to help you explain if you're moving money between categories or adding a new category. That can help me explain to the executive board what the new budget would look like if the amendment is approved. Again, watch that video for a much more in-depth look at things. Next, we have the invoice for reimbursement, probably what you're most excited about, making sure you get that money. So we have an invoice template, which again is just one page. And to request funds, you want to complete that template and return it along with that documentation. Ramon Garza, the other staff person for the district, is the main point of contact for those, and he's in regular communication with you throughout this process. As we talked about, 15% retainage will be automatically calculated on the form, and then those funds will be paid out upon final report. Again, another video here to explain how to go through that process. Finally, down at the bottom, some really important information for your grant. So the general terms and conditions that we just reviewed or glanced at, and again, that's also included in your financial assistance agreement. We have some guidance document frequently asked questions for approved grants. You might be surprised how frequently people are asking questions that were in the guidance document FAQs. Next on there is the logos and MMSWMD identification. We do have some requirements for our logo to be used, a sticker or placed on equipment. So if we go over to the logos page, grantees should identify the district as a funding source on all grant projects for public distribution or in public view. So vehicles, equipment purchased with grant funds should include a sticker, magnetic sign, engraving, or similar, bearing the name of the district. So we have some logos here. You can't see always. There you go. So depending on what the usage is, you can find the various image there that will work for your project. And we can help with that also if you need it. And then credit, this project was funded in part by the Mid-Missouri Solid Waste Management District. So pretty simple there. All right, and then other general forms, we have the E-Verify for business entities, the annual E-Verify affidavit renewal, and the link to the Secretary of State's website for that online filing of security interest. So that's what we've got over on the website, and those resources are getting added to every day. Now that we've gone over what your requirements are and what resources are available to you to make sure that you stay on track, let's turn our attention over to record keeping. So I highly recommend that you have both analog and digital records kept for this project. As we mentioned, the turnover or loss of an employee is one of the biggest ways that your project can face trouble. So making sure that you have a digital copy and an analog copy that multiple people have access to is one way to safeguard against that happening. So let's take a look at a digital file to see what all could be in there to make sure that you keep all of those records straight. All right, so we're now in the future. This is grant number 2027-003, and this project is trying to make sure that it's successful, so they've got some organization. And what they have in this digital file is also what you would want to have in your regular old manila envelope file, binder, whatever works for you. So in here we have the FAA. That is going to be your guidance for what you are doing. This is what you've contracted for. We also have in there the invoice template, which I think can be really helpful so you don't have to always go back to the website to get that invoice prepared. I've got a folder in here for receipts. Now, if it's your manila folder, you can just put it right into that manila folder. But we do recommend that when you make those purchases, whatever you need to do with your entity to get to process your credit cards or your checks or whatever, do those things. And at the same time, stick a copy of it over in this folder, both a paper copy and also a digital copy to make sure that you're ready when it's time to do an invoice. The other thing I have in here is a budget. Now, in your FAA, you have a budget page in there, but it can be difficult to remember what you've already requested reimbursement for, how many funds are available. We allow, movement between line items pretty easily through either a staff amendment or an amendment with our executive board. So it's really helpful to know, oh, you know what, we spent less money on this than we thought we were going to, so we could move that down because this other line item is more expensive. That just is a pretty simple conversation with staff usually to get that approved, but you have to know what you have available. So let's take a look at that budget expenses document. So I just pulled up, this is a totally pretend project here, and we'll take a look to see what they've got going. So in this project that I made up a few minutes ago, they are purchasing a trailer. There's some kind of fabrication. Maybe they're adding lids or doors onto that trailer. There's going to be some kind of bin receptacle for recycling and some marketing materials. So their award amount is $19,500. And then their match amount down here is includes some volunteer hours, a driver, and some purchase of some signage. So their match amount is 7,350. On your invoices, you need to show proof of both the award expenses you want reimbursement for and the match expenses that you have committed to. So this grantee has already done one invoice, and they have put in here their trailer cost them a little bit less, so 9,800 for that. They have not yet done the fabrication, so I expect that'll be coming on a later invoice. They've spent about half the money on bins and half the money on marketing. So if they are going to look around and say, oh no, we just got the bid back from our fabricator and it's going to cost more money than we thought it was. Well, we still have 200 remaining here from our trailer, and we realized that we got a better deal on marketing than we thought we were going to. So we could take those $700 and move them to fabrication. Since that amount is under 10% of the award amount, it probably is just going to require giving me a call and I'll look over it and say, that's approved. We'll go ahead and make that change in your budget and you can move forward. But if you don't get staff approval and you go ahead and make that change, it won't be able to be reimbursed. So knowing how much you have left, and in what categories that is in based on the line items in your budget, it can really help you maximize the funds that have been awarded to you. Under match, it can also be helpful too, because maybe you don't love having to get your volunteers to sign in, or maybe there's been a shift and now you're going to have a different setup. Volunteers are going to be working on a different project. So it looks like this grantee has done about half of their volunteer hours. So maybe they say, okay, well, let's keep the volunteers on this project for another month so that we can get that second invoice in and show that we've finished our volunteer hours, as we maybe move them to take over on a different project. There's any number of things that can happen, and we want to be as flexible as possible within the constraints of your financial assistance agreement. So this just helps the grantee know what else they need to make sure that they're receiving documentation for and sending in to us on an invoice. Back over in that digital file folder that we have for this pretend grantee, I want to reiterate that this is just maybe what you would have at the very beginning of your project. So setting yourself up with that budget so that you just have, what expenses you've been approved for in there, and then you can start adding as you go. And what you set up doesn't have to look like what I have in there. You might have an internal document that makes more sense. And you might be a paper and pencil person that just wants to have that paper copy where you can sketch out what those receipts are and just do the math and know what you have left. The important thing here is to consider how to make sure that there's continuity if there is turnover, and how to make sure that you are tracking all of the expenses in the correct way to get your reimbursement. If we think back to those goals that we have for your project, it's to make sure that you're successful even through turnovers or changes, and also to make sure that you get reimbursed for everything possible. So while I just have a receipts document in or folder in here, you may have other subfolders. You may have something for, maybe your payroll documents that you get from HR, which can prove that you've paid your driver or your staff person, which is part of either your award expense or your match expense. You would want to keep your invoices in here after they're completed. Any amendments that happen, you would want to include in here. Organizations that we serve can go from really, really small, and a $10,000 grant from us is huge, or they can be, very large municipalities where $100,000, while important, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference in their balance books. So, either entity needs to figure out what type of record keeping works for them. But hopefully, through this orientation, you've learned what needs to be saved, what records are important, and you can figure out the right way to save those both digitally and analog for your organization. So as we're finishing up here, let's just review those top line important key information. So to finish strong, you need to start strong. Make sure now, right as you're starting this project, you get yourself set up for success. Make sure that all the staff members that need to be in the loop are in the loop. Make sure that you have those folders set up, a place for you to keep those receipts and those other proofs of purchases, and also that you're familiar with all of your requirements for both quarterly reporting, invoicing, equipment purchasing, everything else that you have contractually agreed to. And speaking of the contract, when in doubt, read your contract. We have had our lawyers look at this. You probably had some lawyers look at it. So make sure that you go back to that if you have a question about how things work. Utilize our training resources. We've really worked hard to make this stuff as clear as possible, and we get a lot of the same questions over and over again. So while it might feel new to you, there's a good chance that we've already put the information out there, and you can find an answer pretty easily. But that doesn't mean the answer is always out there. So if you do have a question that you haven't been able to figure out, please don't hesitate to reach out. We always want to work with a grantee as soon as possible to resolve questions, resolve problems, and figure out a path for your project to continue flourishing and to get on track if things have gotten haywire. The past 5 years, we've been through a lot of turbulence, projects in schools when schools closed, projects with equipment when, logistics and supply chains went haywire. So, we are here ready to figure out solutions that accomplish the goals that we're all working towards and help you to be successful in that. So thanks so much for joining, and reach out to us, MMSWMD.org, and please email myself or Ramon if you have any questions. Thanks so much.